We're live. We're live. All right. We have no viewers at the moment, but we're live. Galen, hello.
What's up, Steve? We're doing it live.
We're doing it live, baby. Yeah. Welcome back to the mainland. My understanding is that you've been on vacation elsewhere recently.
I went to Bonaire, which was, despite being an international politics guy, an island that I did not know about until fairly recently, but it is lovely and I highly recommend it.
Fantastic. Just north of Venezuela, which is not lovely and we do not recommend. Yeah, but Caribbean resorts in January when you're coming from Western Mass, it's a big upgrade, right?
That's correct. It is. I'm freezing my ass off here.
Yeah. Well, that sucks, but at least you got some time away. Meanwhile, Los Angeles is still on fire. In fact, we have new fires. But we might have our first rain in almost a year this weekend. So the hope is that puts the fires out, wets the vegetation so we don't get more, and clears all the heavy metals out of the air. So we have clouds of heavy metals from all the burning EVs, stuff like that.
Let's hope, man. I mean, you obviously still live there. We both have some pretty deep ties to the city. So keeping my fingers crossed because it's been pretty tragic stuff.
Yeah, inshallah, right? And today we are talking about the new administration, which has been inaugurated earlier this week. What is today? Today is the Friday the 24th. Yeah, Friday the 24th, inaugurated on January 20th without incident, more or less. MLK Day. How about that? And it's already been a week. What with the executive orders, what with stuff happening abroad, dialed into Davos and said some crazy shit. You know, we talk mostly about foreign policy and international relations on this show, but we'll get into all kinds of politics, I suppose. More than that as we go. So what are your impressions so far?
I mean, I'm not really surprised by much of what we've seen. The one thing that we mentioned last time where I am somewhat surprised is there actually is a ceasefire in the Middle East, although
we both agreed that that wasn't going to happen, and it totally did.
Yeah, I mean, look, by the way, if you study the Middle East, there's still time for us to be right. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Beyond that, I mean, flurry of executive orders, some of which I believe already have been challenged in court. Others will definitely be challenged in court. And we're going to have an interesting real-life experiment on whether this largely supported Supreme Court or appointed Supreme Court is going to be a check on some of those executive actions.
Yeah, it seems like some yes, some no.
I mean, I don't know what you think about the birthright citizenship one, which is
that's wild. I would be super surprised if that ends up going through. Really, really unpleasantly surprised. I'm unpleasantly surprised that we're even fucking talking about it. Like,
honestly, I'd be surprised, but I would remove your super. I have stopped being super surprised.
Maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Yeah, no, maybe that's the wrong attitude. So there's that one. There's the deploying the military to the border. Another thing that's just not supposed to happen.
Declaring an emergency, which unlocks some extra authority.
Sure, but like, there's also the posse comitatus stuff, right? Where like presidents are just not supposed to be doing this. They generally don't, except in cases of true emergency.
Look, maybe a good way of putting this is I just don't really trust any firm conclusions about American politics anymore. We'll see. There are obviously checks in place for this sort of thing, but
we'll see.
We'll see. He also declared an emergency on energy, I believe.
Right.
Although, by most accounts, there is no energy emergency of which to speak. Oil is currently at a fairly reasonable price. A lot of oil and gas companies don't want to drill more because that would increase supply and drive down prices. So that was another noticeable one.
One of the things we're noticing, though, is that basically all business people in the United States are kissing the ring, from what I can tell. So maybe they'll just do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise the administration might come after them because this is the way things are now done. He seems ready, willing, and able to deploy the resources of the federal government to punish people that don't go along with whatever he wants to do. So we could see more drilling, right? And if you think about, and he's actually said this, if you think about the war in Ukraine, one of the things that hasn't allowed Putin to continue it as long as he has been higher energy prices. Because, of course, Russia is a major energy exporter. If we're to open up drilling and tank oil prices worldwide, that would make a lot of people unhappy. It would make a lot of, his constituents probably much happier. And it would really wreck Russia's budget, right?
Which is why Vladimir Putin hates the shale revolution.
Yes, him and also the Arabs in the Middle East and other oil producers, the Mexicans, now the Brazilians, and so on, Venezuelans.
In addition to environmentalists.
Oh, yeah, them too, right? Yeah, no, just like burning everything in the ground, putting it in the air, and lighting Los Angeles on fire. And, also putting New Orleans under a foot of snow.
Yeah, that's a weird one, too.
That's a weird one.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's going to get weird, but I think it's already pretty weird.
It's pretty weird, and that's why we have this show and why it's called what it is, at least at the moment.
What you said about business people, too, I think that's particularly pronounced in the tech world. A lot of those guys seem to have moved pretty comfortably into the orbit, so that's
true.
From his first time running for president.
And they're making a bunch of changes to make their platforms friendlier to right-wing propaganda or propaganda more generally. So we'll see what effect that has. But I think, at least right now, Wall Street's in the bag as well. But it's not like these people don't have power at the same time. Like one of his famously preoccupied by the stock market. So he has to be a little bit more careful with Wall Street, I think. As far as energy goes, he's very clear in his platform. Bringing down energy prices was the name of the game. Raising standards of living in the United States. And wielding that as a geopolitical cudgel against other oil-producing states. It's energy dominance, right? It's the policy. So I would be surprised if he does too much against the oil industry, but I guess we'll see. To your earlier point, they don't want to produce more.
Not right now.
Bad for business. Yeah, not right now. The oil industry is interesting. It's like you'd think that they would want to just produce as much as possible and make as much money as possible, but they might actually end up making less money by producing too much.
The most striking example of that was toward the start of the pandemic when oil prices went significantly negative for a period of time. I think it was negative $30 a barrel or something like that, if I recall, paying other people to take it. That was obviously a highly unusual situation, but the goal for them is not to drive prices down by so substantially.
Yeah, no, that's right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about foreign policy so far. It's been less than a calendar week. We're at the close of business. Of the first business week of the presidency. What have we seen so far? We've seen some notable stuff from before the inauguration, especially considering the near abroad. So the Western Hemisphere, our immediate neighbors to the north and south, somewhat less immediate, but still pretty close, Greenland. What's going on with Canada and Mexico? Venezuela, the Caribbean, you were just there. And of course, Greenland.
Where I was not necessarily a hot zone of international politics, but yeah.
No, and that was kind of nice, right? Kind of a nice change.
Yes. Look, I'm a little wary of drawing too many conclusions here. As you said, this is we're 4 days in. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to be based on what we knew from before the inauguration and his first term. There already have been some surprises. I, for one, was surprised, aside from the ceasefire we mentioned in the Middle East, that he not necessarily took a strong line on the Ukraine war, but basically announced he wants Putin to end it very quickly. And Putin's response was sort of, screw off.
Okay, yeah, let's start there. Yeah, and that was interesting, right? He's like, this needs to end. Let's get it done. No specifics yet. He does have a Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So maybe Rubio is going to fly over there and talk to Zelensky. I don't know.
Yeah, again, we're early in. I guess I was surprised that cares about this all that much at all when it comes to supporting the Ukrainians. I was sort of expecting
immediate
cut them loose. Now, maybe that will still happen. And what he said was he wants the war over with, and that is consistent with what we know about him. And I'm guessing he's not going to drive too hard of a bargain on behalf of the Ukrainians. That would be my best working hypothesis. But based on Putin's response, it sort of seemed like the Russian view is this remains only our business, not yours, and we are going to take what we want here. I don't see doubling down on the Biden policy of really vigorously backing the Ukrainians. So I would give in the negotiation the Russians the upper hand. But like I said, I was surprised that kind of seemed to warn Putin that he wants this over with. Whether he actually takes tangible actions to bring it about hastily, I'm somewhat more skeptical.
Yeah. So during the campaign, he said, I can fix this in 24 hours. He says all kinds of shit, most of which is patently false and wrong. One of those promises, but he said, like, we're going to bring this to a swift close. The way to do that, obviously, is to pull the plug on Ukrainian aid, to your point. It's not clear whether he's going to do that, to what extent he's going to do that. I'm of the opinion that seeks leverage. He enjoys having leverage over anybody and everybody, anyone, even people that he's friends with and admires, like Putin. Just because he is sympathetic to Putin doesn't mean that he's automatically going to toe Putin's line for no reason. So Putin's going to have to give him something. And from what I've read, from what I can tell, the Ukrainians, the Russians, their bargaining positions there was no overlap there earlier in the war. And now there might actually be. The Ukrainians have made some noises about giving up some of their territory. And
East, I don't think, have they mentioned Crimea yet as something they would be?
No, Crimea seems to be kind of up in the air. Like that is probably a point of contention. It's not clear whether the Russians can defend Crimea, importantly, right, from Ukrainian strikes, because the Ukrainians have their own drone arsenal and their own ballistic missiles.
East, where there's kind of large ethnic Russian populations and where the Russians already occupy territory militarily. That's
a fait accompli. And, the position of the Biden administration is we're going to restore those 1991 borders. No, you're not. Like, that's done. That's not going to happen. I think Zelensky sees that. Part of staking out a bargaining position is always, adopting a maximalist tone on both sides. So you'd expect Putin to be like, fuck off. Like, we're going to take whatever we want. You'd expect Zelensky to be like, we're going to fight to the last man for those original Ukrainian borders. Doesn't mean that they're actually telling the truth.
Yeah, that's right. I also I would certainly give the Russians the upper hand at the moment. I heard an interview recently with Jake Sullivan, the outgoing national security advisor, where he was asked pretty explicitly, like, does the fact that the United States supplies Ukraine with all of its weapons and financial and diplomatic assistance give the United States the right to sort of lean on them to make concessions? And his answer was basically no. That is something for the Ukrainians to decide, and it doesn't cost the United States all that much money. And he explicitly flagged moral considerations when it comes to pressuring an ally that's been attacked sort of unprovoked. That is a big difference from, I do not think thinks in those terms at all.
And look, Sullivan could be saying that publicly, again, to establish a position, right? Conversations in private could be completely different. And I think, there's really no way of knowing other than reading between the lines and watching the behavior of the different parties, like the actual behavior. Russia continues to grind forward. Russia continues to bleed out financially and demographically. The Ukrainians are exhausted. They're out of people. At least the Russians have the North Koreans on the battlefield at this
but
point.
I would still, so like, that's true. I think the Ukrainians are in a bad spot. If I'm the Russians and the deal that's offered is even reasonably good from your standpoint, regardless of what Putin's war aims were at the outset, I would take it immediately. I mean, no matter how it shakes out, I think this has been a strategic blunder for the Russians.
Oh my God, yeah.
Casualties are really bad. They have weathered the storm economically better than some people thought, but it has taken a toll.
And it's getting worse. It's not going to get better.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And like, what's that Putin can sell as a victory? It's probably, we've acquired these new territories. Novorossiya, right? Ukraine will not join NATO formally.
Yeah.
And if he gets those two things, that's probably enough from what I've read in terms of public opinion. What?
Maybe a non-EU pledge as well.
He seems to care about that a lot less because the EU is a paper tiger militarily and has no formal military power.
It does represent sort of an alignment, though, more with Western Europe that he does not like. But I agree with you that the NATO thing is much more substantial.
And he's already lost on NATO because Finland and Sweden joined NATO, and that's far worse for Russia than Ukraine joining NATO. So he's made a bad trade.
If you take at least what Zelensky is saying publicly at face value, it's like this is where the diplomacy might get tricky, which is he seems to acknowledge that they're not going to recapture all of the territory, as you said, that brings us back to the 1990s.
Yeah.
But he wants some sort of mechanism that solves what we in the IR business refer to as the commitment problem.
What's the commitment problem?
Well, so it's like, I can sign a deal with you and say I won't do this. What's the mechanism that prevents me from doing it? So what he doesn't want is a ceasefire, an end to the war, and then the Russians back attacking militarily again 6 months later.
Right. So back in the day, like way back in the day during, medieval Europe, kings would exchange hostages, royal hostages. Like, you give me your daughter and you can have my third son or whatever. And they just hang out at the enemy's court and act like adopted children. And if the peace falls through, they get executed. What?
Or marry them off.
Yeah, totally. How we've managed this in the 20th century is one's allies actually base troops in these places. We have troops in, for instance, South Korea. We have troops in Germany still. And the idea was, like, not necessarily enough troops to stop an invasion, but certainly enough troops to die in an invasion. And that then commits the United States to fighting. So it's a deterrent quality.
Well, so that's where it's going to get tricky, which is if the question is, how do we solve that problem? But one of the Russians' core demands is Ukraine can't be in NATO. And I can't imagine they're going to accept, whether it be American forces or some other NATO country's forces in Ukraine.
I can't either.
Countries would even want that commitment. That's going to be a tricky one to solve.
Yeah, so I would agree. No NATO membership, no NATO countries basing military assets in Ukraine. But there's some ways to square that circle, right? Zelensky has talked about ironclad guarantees from allies, so mutual defense treaties with Britain, Poland, Germany, France, the United States, and maybe like some kind of technical interoperability, maybe, supply agreements and so on. Like, basically all the stuff that has happened de facto as a result of this war, it just keeps happening. Like, maybe that would be acceptable. And so you don't have de jure NATO membership, but you have like the next best thing.
Yeah, I still think that's going to be tricky to work out, but I don't know if this is exactly analogous, but the approach took toward Afghanistan in his first term, I just don't think he wants the U.S. on the hook for this anymore.
Yeah.
And so I would say when it comes to leverage, them has swung against the Ukrainians, and they might have to swallow something that they've been hoping not to for most of the last 3 years, which, we're about a month away from the 3-year anniversary of the start of the war.
Yeah.
So anyway, I found it somewhat surprising that was the message.
Interesting.
I have to see how much he actually cares about that.
Yeah, I think he cares something about it. Just because he talked about it during the campaign, and he does seem interested in. I mean, we've seen in the past that he makes gestures towards satisfying campaign promises in most cases. It doesn't mean that he actually does it or accomplishes anything, or whatever he accomplishes is actually good for him or for the United States. But like, it's not usually the case that it's completely ignored from what I remember and from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I guess I don't find it surprising he wants the war over. I think his stuff about not wanting to get involved in foreign adventures, I think that's very real.
Totally.
I think he has his finger on the pulse of his main supporters, aside from his own personal views on that. I was more surprised that I don't know if we want to call it a tough line, but that he sort of made demands of Putin to begin with, rather than sort of telling the Ukrainians, all right, it's time to wind this up.
Yeah, and just give him whatever he wants. Yeah, totally. But again, like he's not in the business of giving away assets for free.
Yeah.
And he never has been, and he will take advantage of friends. He'll take advantage of enemies. He'll take advantage of frenemies. I think Putin is kind of a frenemy.
Yeah. When it comes to him, yeah, I think that's probably true.
He doesn't give stuff away for free. He just doesn't. So we'll see. All
right. We'll also see on NATO more broadly, but I think that we should save that for another time. But
yes. Yeah. That's an interesting and important question that we'll get to. Let's talk a little bit about Canada and Mexico and what's going on there.
I'm curious to hear your takes on this. I've read more about Greenland and the Panama Canal, and some really bad analysis about how like international institutions aren't working as they amazingly did in past decades. I'm like, what world were you looking at when these things are functioning so spectacularly? But I'm interested to hear your takes on our immediate neighbors.
Yeah. Well, to your point about international institutions, right? I think, they had been hollowed out and ignored when convenient before now. But now it's more marketing than anything, I guess. It's like making it very clear and like making it a point to be like, I don't give a shit. Where before administrations would ignore the institution but still pay lip service to it, right? But as for Canada and Mexico, the name of the game is apparently tariffs. And this is where basically we apply a fee to international trade, anything coming in, any goods coming in, imports from these countries. And Canada and Mexico are among our biggest trading partners. I think Canada is actually the United States' biggest.
Right.
Canada. And Mexico is very big too. And obviously we've had basically free trade with these countries. So tariffs at 0% since the 1990s. And that got renegotiated somewhat during first term. And everybody seemed satisfied, including, there's a jokes like, are they going to rename NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, the Free Trade Agreement or some shit like that? And like basically leave it the same. It wasn't quite like that. They did rename it. I forget what it's called now. And it doesn't matter. It's like NAFTA version 2. And there's some stuff in there about like environmental protections and labor protections and so on that formerly didn't exist. But now he's like, I'm not happy with this deal either.
It's now called the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. So great branding there.
Yes. Okay. Just to be clear, that those countries constitute North America. Now we know. But now he's like, you guys are like sending fentanyl into our country. You guys are sending illegal immigrants into our country. He's accusing Canada of this. So the northern border now is a big problem. It's not just the southern border. It's also the northern border. Everybody's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's preposterous, right? But it doesn't mean he's not saying it. And it doesn't mean he's not threatening to impose 25% tariffs on imports from these countries that are historically, like, relations have been very good for a very long time with Canada. Mexico, it ebbs and flows, but like we've never treated them as enemies, I would say.
Aside from conquering the western half of the United States.
Yes, sure. So post Mexican-American War, which is, we're getting towards 200 years in the past now. Yeah, but now it's like these are punitive measures. And he's naming specific things that he wants, which, I think are either in bad faith or just ignorant. Probably some combination of both.
Look, I also think, by the way, if you'll permit me a brief digression, since you mentioned like the 1840s and 50s, anyone who's watching American Primeval on Netflix, if you're surprised by the scenes where everyone dies as I am, it's good to know.
I haven't seen that. Is that about like Mormon settlement?
It's about the Utah War, which I incidentally learned about not that long ago, reading whatever that book is, the Krakauer Under the Banner of Heaven book.
Oh, that's a good book.
It's a good book. It'll make your head explode.
Yeah, that was some crazy shit, man.
Yeah, I never learned about it in high school or anything. But
no, people don't like to talk about it, especially the Mormons.
Miniseries, it's like 6 episodes. I'm on like the 5th episode, and there's probably 3 or 4 of them where just like everyone dies, like everyone.
Right. So they just start over with a new cast. You could call it an anthology.
So anyway, I also think part of this, I don't know if you can get your take. I do think certainly from core supporters, but I actually think it's broader than that now. Like there's been a real backlash against one of my least favorite terms in the entire world, but with neoliberalism, of which NAFTA was very much a part. The idea that you basically would break down borders and have free flows of goods and capital.
That's right. The Washington Consensus. Like, by the way, this is now bipartisan.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Started under the Biden administration, where he started, distancing himself from free trade. So
I don't necessarily think tariffs are going to fix any of this, but the hollowing out of American manufacturing that we've heard so much about and rampant inequality in the United States, those are both at least partly due to the neoliberal turn we saw start coming about in the 1980s. I mean, NAFTA was actually originally negotiated, I believe, by the first Bush administration, even though
signed by Clinton.
Clinton signed it into law. In 2016, made a point of hanging that around Hillary Clinton's neck during the campaign. So I think that's partly it too, that there is still a lot of resentment toward those policies. And even if these things are more symbolic or aren't going to have much of an effect. Also, by the way, another thing I've learned from this is after NAFTA, the U.S. was able to export obesity to Mexico.
Yeah, totally.
It's like,
congratulations.
Bad things too. So
it goes both ways. Yeah, no, you're right about inequality. You're right about free trade. The losers from free trade were not compensated whatsoever. The rich have gotten richer in this country, and now there seems to be internecine warfare between the billionaires, the faction of MAGA, and the labor faction of MAGA, because gained support from the poorer classes and the labor classes, and labor actually endorsed. Well, they didn't necessarily endorse, but he took that constituency, which had been traditionally Democratic, away from the Democrats over the last several elections, and that's a huge realignment. It's a huge deal. But are they going to get what they want? Are they going to get a better life path and lifestyle and return of the dignity of manufacturing labor? No, and no. I don't think they're going to get anything. Here's why. Free trade is like scrambling an egg, and unscrambling an egg is not possible. It's a one-way process. And I'll say a little bit more about that. Those factories are gone. It is too expensive to open them again. And if they, like, even if there's political will to make that happen, the price of goods resulting from American labor will be so high that nobody will buy them. It'll be uncompetitive and the standard of living will go down. So it's like, okay, we have manufacturing in this country again. That's great. You cannot buy anything on Amazon.
So if
Your
that's,
TVs are now $3,000 instead of $300.
if that's the case, and I putting aside things like strategic goods, like the U.S. is onshoring semiconductor plants now.
Yes, and that makes some sense. I can understand that.
But if that's true, I mean, now I'm venturing into a territory where I'm not at all comfortable, which is American political strategy. But if we take it face value,
Galen, it's a podcast. Who gives a shit? We're streaming on Twitch right now. Go ahead, venture.
No, so I mean, if you take it face value, though, that one of the big problems the Democrats have now, and as you said, hemorrhaging constituencies where they used to have, that was kind of their core.
Yes.
And you're saying none of this stuff is going to work. Like,
No.
what's the I mean, aside from the political calculus, like, what do you do to help people in situations like that?
Handouts. I mean, like, so if you look at the sort of overall economic program of MAGA, it is to shut off the flow of immigration, right? So at the bottom of the labor market, decrease supply. And so that should raise wages in theory for the working class. And then also shut off free trade so they don't have to compete with cheap labor everywhere else. The problem is it took a decade or two for free trade to really take effect and produce the results that it did. And it will take at least that long for it to reverse if it ever really does. It will cause a massive economic dislocation. And in the meantime, this constituency is going to be angry because the promises that MAGA made won't be kept. So it's like, what else can they do in the meantime to keep labor on side? Well, they can scapegoat people. They can increase handouts. Republicans used to be for cutting entitlements. That is very much not the case anymore. They will certainly not be cutting Social Security. They won't be cutting Medicaid or anything like that. That's where the bulk of the budget deficit is coming from.
Yeah.
And like, you can cut around the margins, you can fire federal employees and all of this. It's like, but you're not going to make a dent in what actually needs to happen. So there's going to be all of these people who are already angry. They're just going to get angrier because their quality of life will not improve. They're going to get so-called like cultural goods, right? Like, oh, we're on top again. And like, you educated people, you fucks that have fucked us over. Like now we're stepping on your necks, right? Maybe and illegal immigrants are all going to get deported, so we can feel good about that. But in terms of the actual impact on the day-to-day, how much money people have, what things cost, I think it'll get worse.
Well, just because you brought it up, this is again somewhat tangential, but I find it fascinating. I'm looking at, there are various websites that have the U.S. national debt accruing in real time.
Oh, yeah.
So the U.S. is currently at $36.4 trillion roughly, which is a large.
It's a good amount.
Yeah, I mean, if you're actually serious about doing something about that, there's really only a few things you can do. I know military spending gets a lot of talk, and yes, that would save some money. Funding and equipping the IRS might get some significant savings in terms of foregone tax revenue. But really,
Biden started down that road, but obviously going to reverse it.
But really, if you're serious about it, it means two things that no one wants to do, because it's the part of the budget that's largely on autopilot, which is entitlements, and raising taxes.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the two things, if you're really serious about doing it, that you would have to do. And I don't think either of those things is going to happen.
I agree. Yeah. So, all right. That was a digression into MAGA economics. As for 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, this would be a fucking disaster for both of those countries. Canada, some reports I've read would lose 3% of its GDP as a result of this, which is an instant deep recession. instant recession, like a bad one. Yeah. 3% doesn't sound like much, but like that hurts really fucking bad. And in fact, even the threat of this was sufficient to bring down the government over there because it's a national emergency, and now they're basically having an election to decide who's most qualified to deal with this national emergency of this guy getting reelected and being like, we're gonna fuck you over. You're our biggest trading partner, and we're gonna fuck you over because fentanyl or whatever, right? And Canadians are like fairly rational people, and they're watching this, and they're like, what can we do? Can we fight back? Like, we can. We get a lot of energy actually from Canada.
Yeah.
And that's a major component of our economy. So if relations break down, they could actually inflict a lot of damage on us. It would be a huge lose-lose. With Mexico's also pretty unhappy about this. They have done a lot to try to stop migration northward. And during the first administration, they kept a lot of migrants from south of Mexico, so Central America in particular. They kept them in Mexico and did not allow them to immigrate to the United States. So I would imagine they'll redouble their efforts there. As far as fentanyl goes, the cartels, man. Part of what MAGA has talked about is actually bombing the cartels in Mexico, which is insane.
Do you could you see that happening? I could see it happening.
Hey, we have a viewer. Check it out.
Oh, all right, cool.
Yeah, cool.
One, we're not just talking to each other.
No, by all means, ask us questions in the chat. Could I see us bombing Mexico to disable the cartels? I think that the government is stupid enough to try it.
I should say, by the way, it wouldn't be the first time the United States interferes directly in Mexican affairs.
Oh, and we have a proud tradition of interfering all over the Western hemisphere. And in fact, we've done it as recently as the 1980s in Panama and Grenada. And it, to the extent that people are calling the most transformational president since Reagan, that was Reagan's doing. So who knows? Maybe we're due for another go around here.
We could go back a lot further than that too.
Sure.
Maybe that's a good place to talk about the Panama Canal in Greenland, which I guess I would just say, like, I was very surprised. Maybe I didn't follow the campaign closely enough that these are live issues.
The Panama Canal.
I might get the details wrong, but Jimmy Carter, who recently passed away, negotiated
a very good man and a very terrible president.
Spot on. He negotiated giving Panama back control of the canal. I think the negotiation took place, or the signing took
70s, and it went over in 77.
Okay, 77. So this is now almost 50 years later. And I don't recall this being on anyone's radar.
Nope.
It certainly doesn't have the same strategic significance that it used to.
To the extent that Panama had, the canal. So just for the benefit of our one watcher, the canal is important because it cuts down on transit time between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. So that's important. The thing is that the canal is actually drying up due to climate change. So it's unclear how much of an asset it's going to be a few decades from now. It's my understanding. And as far as the flow of trade, it's really changed quite a bit since the opening of the canal, and it's not as big of a deal as it used to be, frankly, and percentage-wise, in terms of the amount of our trade, the amount of anybody's trade. So it's still important, but it's less important than it used to be, and it's a wasting asset.
Well, and then I honestly don't really understand the whole Greenland thing at all, but
okay,
it seems it seems like he thinks about the world now kind of like a Teddy Roosevelt figure,
or a Putin, or a Xi Jinping, which is, I'm really big, everybody should bow down to me, especially around me, and I'm going to take what I want. So it's a mindset of predation, which the United States had. I wouldn't say it had eschewed, we still did plenty of predation, especially in the Middle East, and other places too. But now it's just naked. It's I want this, I'm going to take it, and you can't stop me. That's new.
Those things didn't necessarily come in the form of like outright annexation.
True.
So yeah, I'm not a big defender of American foreign policy either, but
No.
this strikes me as different.
It is different. So speaking about Greenland, we have Alaska. So Greenland would provide some really nice symmetry. And I think, has pretensions to being an interior designer. So maybe that's part of it.
I would love to see that put in the national security strategy that the White House has to issue.
Yeah, no, we need a counterpart to Alaska on the other side of the continent. Nobody lives there. It's like 50,000 people. It belongs nominally to Greenland, which is a NATO ally. And yeah, people mostly don't think about Greenland except to say when they look at a globe, hey, that's much bigger than I thought. But it's misleading because of the Mercator projection. It's actually not that big. What it does have a lot of rare earth alloys, which is important. I mean, this is stuff that goes into your cell phone so that you can watch Twitch on the go. Also EVs, batteries, like 21st century technologies, maybe fusion reactors at some point. So like that's not nothing. And right now China has most of the rare earths. And so that's bad for us if we're going to fight a Cold War or maybe a hot one against China. 1, 2, it does sit near the Arctic Circle and near some trade routes that are opening up because the Arctic Circle is fucking melting. And it's going to be open ocean. And I think it already is for some of the year. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why the Panama Canal doesn't matter very much anymore.
And the Russians have been sort of exploring the strategic implications of the melting Arctic Circle for a while.
Very much so. Yeah. And they have a massive, Arctic border because their entire country's frozen, basically.
For now.
So for now. Yeah. That's going to change. It's going to turn into a giant marsh sooner or later.
I got to confess, the last time I really thought about Greenland was watching The Princess Bride when the guy's like, do you want me to send you back to where I found you in Greenland? So like, it's just not thinking about really ever. To the extent I've thought about rare earth minerals, it's been in places like the Congo, which if you ever want to feel unbelievably depressed, go read a book called Cobalt Red.
Oh God. Or watch, what is it? Blood Diamond?
Yeah. And if you want to understand why China is doing a lot better relative to where the U.S. was, it's because China took over a lot of what were formerly U.S. positions in the Congo, dating back to the search for during the Second World War. U.S. companies sold a lot of those mines, so China has kind of cornered the global cobalt market, and maybe that's partly what Greenland is about. I tend to think a lot of this stuff is more about like demonstrating a muscular diplomacy.
Yeah, if you want to call what he's doing diplomacy, it's old school. It's another, his favorite president to talk about is William McKinley, and a lot of sort of the policy stuff we're seeing in terms of high tariff levels, in terms of immigration, comes from like an anachronistic viewpoint. It comes from over 100 years ago in the American tradition. It's not to say that it's never happened or that we haven't done it in the past. It did happen, and we have done it. We just never thought we would go back there.
Yeah, McKinley was also, at least I was taught, like kind of one of the forerunners of American populism, like the guy that brought populist strategy into American politics.
That's right. He stole bimetallism from William Jennings Bryan. Like that's a deep fucking pull. If we want to start talking about, silver versus gold and all of that. Jennings Bryan. I think we can skip over that shit.
Yeah. The guy who never saw an election that wasn't worth losing.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, do we want to talk about the Middle East?
Let's talk about the Middle East. What's going on in the Middle East? And we got a ceasefire in Gaza.
We did, which involved basically a hostage exchange for, at least for now, an end to the fighting. Now, one thing that was fairly predictable in my view was that the Israelis would then turn their attention to the West Bank.
And that's exactly what's happened.
Particularly in places like Jenin, which is, if you look at a map, sort of the very northern center of the West Bank, and historically a spot of Palestinian resistance. I guess the reason I said earlier that, to put it in the worst possible way, there's still time for us to be right, is, Hamas is down, but it's not out.
I don't think there's any way to take it out.
And people have been saying that since the war started, and they are kind of proudly parading back in Gaza now, although I'm not so sure how popular they are there, given the devastation that has been visited on that territory.
That's correct, but they still have all the guns.
Correct. They are much more popular, as I understand it, in the West Bank, which has not suffered the direct effects of the war.
Which is interesting because the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be running the West Bank.
Yeah, but the Palestinian Authority now is viewed essentially as a collaborator with the Israelis. It's a totally discredited organization.
Run by an 88-year-old or however old Abbas is at this point.
Who's not won an election in 20 years.
Yeah. Not a lot of legitimacy, basically.
Yeah. So, yeah, the PA has been kind of a zombie organization for quite some time now.
Right.
Again, is it possible that we return to a world where essentially the Israelis do what they like to call mowing the lawn, which is we've got enemies on our borders, particularly in Gaza, and every so often there'll be a problem. And so every so often we'll have to use military force to take care of it. And there will kind of be this horrific status quo that goes on.
So that would be a return to the policy that's been in place for a long time. I wonder about the expulsionists.
I do as well.
There's now a faction of, far right Israeli settlers in the government, right? Ultra Orthodox and just extreme right wingers who want to finish the job of booting the Palestinians all the way out of so-called Greater Israel and establishing a one-state solution. One wonders what happens to the Israeli Arabs should this go down. It's very easy to confuse Israeli Arabs with Palestinians.
Israeli Arabs, by the way, the roughly 20 to 21% of who are Israeli citizens who are either descendants of or still alive from the 1948-49 Arab-Israeli War who did not flee the area.
That's right. And they vote in elections. They have their own political party. And I think they have representation in the Knesset.
They do.
Yeah. So they're full participants in Israeli life. But what separates them from the Palestinians, right? And it's how far is this really going to go? How lower D democratic is this type of outcome? Is Israel still a democracy? Or is it a security state? These are all open questions as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. I mean, in first term, there was talk of him having a more permissive attitude toward things like Israeli annexation of the West Bank. It didn't happen. If you look at the appointments, though, things like appointing Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to Israel, and some of his other appointments, it's conceivable that annexation proceeds. And at that point, there remains.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the two-state solution is dead? Or was it dead before any of this even started?
I thought it was dead for a long time.
Yeah, people still talked about it, but the reality on the ground didn't match whatever was being talked about. Oslo process is dead, right?
It's been dead for the continuation of the two-state solution, which I'll admit has a certain intuitive appeal, is all of the other solutions are too awful to contemplate. Now
they're being contemplated.
So the other possibilities are a one-state or binary state solution or binational state.
Yep.
Where Israelis and Palestinians basically share the territory. The problem with that is the whole point of Israel is that it is a Jewish state.
Correct. And if they encompass the Palestinians, then that Israeli Arab population would go over 50% in a hurry.
Although it's quite close now to 50-50.
Okay.
But yes, it would kind of defeat the original purpose of the founding of the state of Israel. Another one is an apartheid state,
Mhm.
which I don't think I need to say why that would be bad.
Mhm.
And another one is what you were just referring to, which is forced expulsions. And I don't think I have to explain why that would be bad.
Yeah.
But I see no possibility right now. Someone asked me this at a talk I gave last year, like how a two-state negotiating process can be revived. I have no fucking idea.
Yeah. I mean, like, in order to do that, you need to have a negotiation partner, right? And the Palestinian Authority, for all of its many, many problems over the years, was a negotiation partner for Israel. And they negotiated in the 90s in particular. And then negotiations kind of broke down. And we got like this forum with no substance behind it that just continued on. Now Hamas is effectively in control of the Palestinian polity, from what I can tell, to the extent that
look at the number of obstacles you would have to overcome. Like basically, what Steve's referring to is the negotiations essentially collapsed in 2000 and led to the Second Intifada, from which it never.
We had Sharon, right?
Yeah. So nothing going on, and it's kind of only gotten worse since then. I mean, there were elections held in Gaza in 2006, which Hamas won.
Yep.
They seized control of the territory totally in 2007, and since 2010, it's been under an Israeli blockade. And we've just seen round of violence after round of violence. So there was 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, 2019, 2021, obviously October 7th. All the while, things in the West Bank have been totally stagnant. And I don't see any peace party constituency on either side at this point. I mean,
me either.
Labor is basically non-existent. And I don't think most Palestinians at this point see a negotiation partner from the Israelis. So
the question becomes, how serious are the Israelis about this at this point? And I think the answer is increasingly serious after October 7th, and like what's already happened in Gaza, right? Like it's difficult to come back from that. And if it comes down to open warfare, which it kind of has, you know who's going to win that, right? So that's and part of what has stopped that from happening in the past has been the United States. What if the United States doesn't stop it from happening anymore? That's kind of what we're talking about.
The speculation is that he might be that guy. He is very popular in Israel, extremely.
Extremely popular. And look, apparently he leaned on Netanyahu to get this ceasefire done, which is notable and interesting, I would say. Not something I necessarily would have expected.
Yeah, I wonder, though, if Netanyahu's playing the long game there, though.
He plays a lot of long games. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, this gives a victory. It happened on Biden's watch, but I actually think it's fair to say that should get some of the credit for it. I don't think it's a coincidence that the ceasefire went into effect right around the time of the inauguration.
It kind of reminds you of Iran releasing the hostages.
Carter, yeah.
Yeah.
Which you want to talk about corruption. We can get to that another time.
It's open season on corruption, my friend.
Don't I know it?
Yeah. Have you bought any coin?
No.
Yeah.
And I don't plan to, or any digital currency at this point. Although
the mother of all.
Yeah, I mean, although at this point one could maybe accuse me of missing out when it comes to Bitcoin, since that shit appears to keep going up for reasons I don't totally understand.
I could talk a lot about that, but let's not go there.
Sure. I just don't. My sense is that the Israelis view themselves as having had a good year.
Which is true. They've had a great year. And we talked about that on the last show. They've kicked ass all over the greater Middle East.
So I think there's that. I think part of what Netanyahu is doing is he wants to keep in his corner. So that he has him there when inevitably there's debates about what to do about Iran's nuclear program.
Which will come soon.
Yes. And likewise when it comes to the future of the West Bank.
Yeah. So how about this? What are the other Arab states thinking as they watch this? Because that's important and relevant too. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria is not even really a country anymore. Turkey, not an Arab state, but a Muslim power, certainly. What's their position?
Yeah, so I would distinguish between the political leadership in a lot of these countries and ordinary folk.
Yeah, none of these countries are democracies.
Correct.
Including Turkey at this point.
I think Turkey still imprisons more journalists than any other country on the planet.
Hey, who knows? Like, we can give them a run for their money soon enough, right?
I'd have to double check if that's still the case, but
yeah,
I take your point.
In the other countries, they don't have to imprison journalists because they're scared shitless.
Well, and now this will be another topic I'm sure that we'll get into, but the technological big brother aspect of this stuff has gotten so scary, including for countries I'm about to talk about. So I guess just to take the most obvious and arguably most important example of the countries you mentioned would be Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Which is prior to October 7th, depending on which analysis you believe, it seems like Israel and Saudi Arabia were nearing the possibility of a full normalization of diplomatic relations.
Which is a huge deal.
And would have been utterly unthinkable not that long ago. And
yeah.
I will acknowledge this was one where I was frankly wrong. I mean, anyone that's studied the history of the Arab-Israeli dispute and the position of Saudi Arabia and most of the rest of the Arab world would have been absolutely shocked that we would be talking about a normalization agreement in the absence of the creation of an independent Palestinian state.
Well, a lot has happened in Saudi Arabia to enable that. Primarily the rise and consolidation of Mohammed bin Salman, who's a modernizer. He's not a liberal, but he's a modernizer, and he could really use a trading relationship with Israel, financial relationship with Israel, technological relationship with Israel. He seems like hell-bent on modernizing Saudi.
I think there's a few drivers of the shift. One is the one you just mentioned, which is there's all sorts of benefits to be had when it comes to technology and modernization from working with the Israelis. Another one is it helps put Saudi Arabia more firmly in Washington's good graces. I mean, it's a long-standing partnership, but one that has had
ups and downs
in the road, 9/11 being an obvious one.
Yes, that's a major. We should have invaded fucking Saudi Arabia.
And then the other, well, that might have had some
adverse consequences.
But
well, not like what we ended up doing didn't have adverse consequences, correct. But yeah.
Correct. Biggest strategic misstep since Vietnam. But the other one, the Iranians have really accomplished something significant, which is Iranian foreign policy has succeeded in making the Arabs and Israelis work together.
Yeah, it took a really long time, but they're super obstinate, these fucking guys, and they just keep causing problems and trying to export the revolution and undermine these monarchies and dictatorships. And eventually they're like, all right, you know what? Fuck you. Like, we're gonna, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's a proverb that apparently comes out of this part of the world. And that's what's happened, right?
And it's a potent counterbalancing coalition if you are Saudi Arabia and you can be on the same side, not only with the other key Sunni Arab states like the Emirates and the Jordanians and the Egyptians, but also with the Israelis and the Americans.
Yeah, that's a winning hand.
So that's a big part of it. But to answer your question, Saudi Arabia, as many people predicted, has kind of done a U-turn on normalization since October 7th because the Palestinian issue has come roaring back to the center of political attention in the Arab world. And the question I have is whether MBS, certainly right now, I don't think he can just move ahead. But if, say, in 3 to 5 years toward the end of this administration, if things have quieted down,
the administration hasn't ended, but please continue. I think it will, but who the fuck knows? Yeah.
So at that point, can he then move ahead if enough time has passed since October 7th?
Depends what's happened in the interim and what continues to happen, right?
So right now, I think that's all on hold, but I honestly am not sure how significant it is, because if you take someone like MBS or Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ in the UAE, or Sisi in Egypt, I don't think these guys really care about the Palestinians that much, frankly.
They don't care at all.
So I think the name of the game for them is wait for things to cool off and then see what you can get away with. And maybe in the meantime, there's still covert cooperation.
Yeah, but what if things don't cool off?
If they don't cool off, look, this is a imperfect analogy, but it's one that I like. If you study Turkish politics, you know that up until Erdogan, the Turkish military was an ever-present looming threat in the background to any politician who might get too out of step with the military's political values.
That's right.
Erdogan has succeeded in overcoming that in a way that many people did not expect. In a similar way, the clerical establishment in Saudi Arabia has traditionally served as a major constraint on what the political leadership can get away with. And thus far, MBS has had a lot of success, certainly more than I anticipated, in reining in the clerics and sort of...
Women can drive. You can go watch movies, by yourself as a woman. You can drive yourself there.
It's pretty popular among younger Saudis in particular.
Yeah. No, it's amazing what he's managed to accomplish. And by the way, he's done it by breaking people's heads and carving up journalists in foreign countries and all the rest of it, right? MBS, not a nice guy, not a good guy.
No.
But an effective guy.
He has succeeded in that regard.
Yeah, he certainly has.
So, but I guess what I'm saying is I am not ready today to say that all of those traditional constraints on Saudi political authority are just vanished. I think there are still limits to what he can get away with. So as you say, it's going to
depend to risk, right? At what times?
Yeah. And it's going to depend on what happens in the region. And I think issues 1 and 2 right now are what's going to happen with Israel-Palestine, and now as attention shifts to the West Bank, and what's going to happen with Iran.
Yeah. So I actually think that Iran is going to take pole position here, take over from the Palestinians, because it's frankly a much bigger threat and more important to regional safety and security. And under that guise, some kind of deal. That's one possibility, because it's just a bigger fire, and like we got to get together against this, whatever ends up happening here. If the Iranians make a deal somehow with the new administration, which doesn't seem to be in a friendly mood, shall we say, to put it mildly, with the Israelis, who certainly are not in a friendly mood, then maybe the Palestinian issue retains its influence and nothing gets done between the Saudis and the Arabs and the Israelis. So I think it's geopolitical largely, and that's the consideration. It's kind of like what's most salient at the time, what's most relevant.
Yeah, and I don't think the prospects for a deal are good. Although, and if this happens, there will be people like myself who have to say that they maybe got some of this wrong, which is the Iranians, unlike, the Israelis had a relatively good year, we were saying, really crippling Hezbollah and kind of the Iranians and a bunch of other things. The Iranians had a really bad year.
Disastrous along every every dimension you care to name. Fucking disaster everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, the one win, if you want to call it that, they had is that Israel internationally has seen its reputation in tatters, except in the United States, although even certain pockets of the United States as well.
They're like college campuses.
But beyond that, I mean, their number one proxy, Hezbollah, has been really decimated, pretty fashion.
Exploding cell phones.
Yeah. Bashar al-Assad is no longer in power, and so they lost kind of their main way into the heart of the Sunni Arab world. They still retain some leverage in Iraq, that's true, but Israel has hit their homeland pretty much with impunity.
Yep.
And so the question, can't remember this if we mentioned this last time. This could go one of two ways. One is that they'll race to get the bomb.
Yeah, we did talk about this.
Okay. And there are reasons that make sense to do that. There's also a lot of downsides to doing that. Or another possibility is that they are so weak now that they do opt to negotiate a deal that's better than the initial Iran nuclear deal, which hard to believe, but was
better for whom? They've lost leverage.
Better for the United States.
Yeah, better for us, right?
Yeah.
They're out of cards. They have one card left to play.
Yeah.
And that's we're going to go get a bomb, but it's not clear that that's such a big risk, you know. Khamenei's still in charge and they have a moderate president.
By their standards.
Yeah, by their right. Right. This guy's still an Islamic fundamentalist, Shia fundamentalist. Yeah, I've no idea what direction they're going to go. It's all bad options, which I think we mentioned last time. So when you have all bad options, sometimes you play for time.
Yeah.
And hope that things don't get worse. I think if they play for time, like things will just end up going even worse.
That's what I was going to say, because he's going to take a hard line with them.
Exactly. He's going to start squeezing, and that could happen next week, right? Where it's like new sanctions, new problems for them to deal with, right? And demands. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it happened next week. It's on his list somewhere. You know that.
And so I guess their other option is try to reach out to the Russians and the Chinese and get some more backing that way. But I think
why would the Russians and Chinese? Well, first of all, the Russians are all out of help at the moment. The Russians couldn't help the Syrians. Iranians are more important, but it's like they're kind of busy right now.
Yeah.
The Chinese probably could help them, but the Chinese are mostly interested in helping China, as we've seen. And plus they're helping the Russians already.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe they could do something, but like, are the Russians and the Chinese going to defend Iran? They are not. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the resources.
And they do not get into a confrontation in the Middle East with the
No. Like, that's not where their focus lies. Russia's obviously 100% focused on Ukraine, to the point where they've actually lost control over a bunch of other areas that they're interested in elsewhere, which we didn't talk about, but like, that's a disaster too for them. And China is interested in Taiwan. That's what they really, and the South China Sea. They don't give a fuck about Iran, except to the extent that it helps them in those other areas.
And their economy, which has not been doing as well of late.
Oh, the Chinese economy. Yeah, that's true. But I don't see how Iran helps with that. I suppose with cheap oil, but they're mostly getting that from the Russians at the moment.
Yeah. So this is just to say, you know, when things unexpected happen, you should flag when your predictions did not get borne out, if for no other reason than it allows me to brag when I am right. If you go back to like 2015, when the Obama administration announced the original nuclear deal, the that was made was, this deal is imperfect, but it is absolutely the best that we could get. Mm-hmm. There was no world in which we were going to get them to give up their ballistic missile program or their support or their broader behavior in the Middle East. If it turns out that they do not race for the bomb and basically say uncle because they're getting squeezed so hard and agree to moderate on those policies, I would have to say that I and many others were not correct in taking the administration at its word in 2015. That basically a hardline policy might have worked.
Yeah, that would be amazing because it would represent a sea change for the Iranian regime.
Yeah,
it would basically be a new Iranian revolution, and like without necessarily needing to change the government, right? It would be a repudiation of everything they've done for the last 50 years.
Which is why I'm sort of skeptical that will happen.
Yeah, probably not, right? It would be good if it did.
Yeah,
for the Iranians too, I think, at this point. Yeah,
I think the Iranian revolution has been a disaster for Iranians.
Yeah, but do we see Khamenei like folding his hand finally?
I don't.
Yeah,
I really don't.
So that implies racing for the bomb and a big war in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to see all of the debates that you and I used to teach like 15 years ago at UCLA.
Woo! Let's go Bruins.
Americans outfit the Israelis so they can do it. Should the United States bomb these facilities themselves? Right? Like, I'm sure all of those same debates are going to.
I think under the carriers are in the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf and bombing the shit out of Iran. And I think the Israelis are doing it too.
They can't do it right now unless they get U.S. aircraft and bunker busters. And so there was just an article. Give me a second while I look this up. I think it was in the it was in the Wall Street Journal, basically saying should give that stuff to the Israelis.
So they can do it?
Yeah, so they can do it.
All right, so maybe we give them some stuff to do it, and we also do it. We just hit them from every angle and just bomb the shit out of them, and either they get a bomb or they don't, but they're in even worse shape than they were. It's like they get a bomb, okay, great. Do they then use it, or we just keep hitting them?
I mean, look, so like the for doing it is it's the ultimate deterrent.
Yeah, so, but if you're already getting bombed, right? There's like, what are you deterring? I guess like invasion, but we're not going to do that anyway.
Invasion, I guess regime change type operation, things like that. But like the track record, and you know, we can talk about the good and bad of this, but the track record for countries that cross the United States when it comes to proliferating is not very good. Like
there's one example, North Korea.
North Korea is not a nice place to live.
No. As far as that goes, I thought you were talking about like regime survival.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Does Iran just want to become North Korea at this point? I don't know. Now, if the Russians or the Chinese were to transfer a bunch of nuclear weapons over to Iran, that would be a different story. But that would never happen.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't see that happen. I did see some stories that, in exchange, to your point, that the Russians don't have a lot of help to offer right now. They're getting stuff from the Iranians for the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, no, they're getting like the drones, right? The Shahed drones, the suicide drones.
Part of that deal involved some sharing of Russian nuclear secrets. I don't know if that was confirmed, but I don't know how much that's helping the Iranian. Like, if the Iranians want to get a bomb, I don't think the knowledge or technology is beyond their means. Like, they've been right at the threshold for a long time now.
It's not, but like, I guess my point is, so you're getting bombed conventionally. You now have like a handful of primitive nuclear weapons that you can attach to ballistic missiles. Like, do you use against a conventional campaign? And if so, how do you do it?
Like, no, I don't think you do. I think the idea is...
You just expect it to stop because now you have nuclear weapons?
Yeah. I think you expect that now you're like North Korea, which is maybe it's not good for the country, but the governing entity remains fairly immune from what's going on in the broader world.
To me, it's a really interesting tactical question, right? Because it's like this level of activity has already been happening before we went nuclear, right? Does it then stop because whoever's bombing you isn't willing to take the risk that now exists? Maybe. Or it just continues or intensifies and you dare them, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, this is where we get into debates about like what matters here. Is it like the people making the decisions? Like, as you say, if they were basically to wave the white flag, that would in some ways mean giving up the core of their ideology.
I think in basically every way, right?
And so I don't think Khamenei is the guy to do that.
No, but he's almost dead. So yeah, maybe there'll be an opportunity for, I mean, probably not with the Revolutionary Guards in charge, which they are.
Yeah. And maybe we should do a whole episode at some point on Iranian politics post-revolution. But like, if you know about how the role of the supreme leader, which is Khamenei, operates in Iran, you know it's got pretty unchecked power.
Yes.
I imagine he will give the reins to someone who's like-minded as he is. So
yeah, it was going to be the dude who died in a helicopter crash, Rice. Yeah. Can't be him anymore, but maybe somebody like him. Yeah, like if I'm them, I'm making the fucking deal. I lost my gamble, you know. But it might just be too hard. It might be too much.
Yeah, the difference is you're you and they're them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't know. It's going to be interesting and probably frightening because I think this part of it could kick off at any time, and nobody's really paying much attention to it right now. But they
All
will
right.
go from not paying attention to paying a lot of attention.
Do we want to do East Asia and then wrap?
Yeah, let's do that. All right. So I have not read too much news vis-a-vis the new administration and East Asia.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a lot. I think most of the attention, similar to the Western Hemisphere, has been on tariffs on Chinese goods.
Yeah, although he has said so he's talked more about tariffs on Mexico and Canada than he has on China, which is interesting. It's notable. So is he holding out for some kind of deal?
Maybe, and I think, did I read that she was invited to the inauguration?
Oh, I don't know. That's crazy though.
Let me check that. I don't want to spread that around if that's
That's
not right.
wild. That's why you have to check it because like I would believe that did that.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. Invited Xi Jinping to the inauguration.
Did not show. It was a no-show.
She sent a vice president.
Okay.
To attend instead.
All right.
And like as you know, had like a certain admiration for Xi.
Yes.
Not the only leader like that. I think he called Sisi in Egypt like his favorite dictator or something like that.
He's a big fan of strongmen and nationalists.
So like there's that element of it. Again, he's kind of not wanting to get the U.S. overextended. He wants some of these trade deals to be fairer. I do think that there's a sense, not only in Washington, but in other places, that the U.S. is better positioned than people thought it would be, say, 5-10 years ago.
I think that's right, because China was supposed to overtake the United States economically, and that has not happened.
Their economy has not been doing great as of late, and demographics there are starting to bite.
Unfavorable, yeah. And look, they still have a ton of power. They're still modernizing their military. They're still extremely dangerous, and they could conceivably turn things around. But the moves that Xi has been making policy-wise have been kind of the opposite. He's been cracking down on entrepreneurship and finance, which is kind of not how you get a dynamic economy. It's the opposite.
So I expect there to be, again, like you, I haven't seen a ton in this long 4 days that we're analyzing, but I suspect that there will be. I think he will continue some of the Biden stuff on things like semiconductors and AI. I think that
all of that stuff is consensus.
I don't think there's any debate between the parties on that stuff.
No, and there are areas of overlap between the Republicans and the Democrats. People forget this. It's like, that's a big one.
Yeah. I think one thing I'm watching, it's become more front and center in the last decade, is South Korea's nuclear program.
Ooh.
The polls I've seen indicate it's popular. Biden tried to make U.S. extended deterrence commitments there more credible. As you said earlier, the U.S. keeps somewhere on the order of 28,000 troops stationed in South Korea. It sounds like a lot of South Koreans are not putting a lot of stock in the U.S. nuclear as North Korea races forward with its program.
Yeah.
So
the big difference there is North Korea can now credibly hit the United States. And by the way, has, through executive action, ordered the development of a missile shield for the United States. We already have some amount of interceptor technology, mostly arrayed against North Korea. I think it's in Alaska and California, but he wants to expand that. And this is a big reason why.
Well, so the question is, in the past, notably in 2016, has said he's not strictly against nuclear proliferation, and he actually raised this exact example of South Korea as well as Japan.
He must be reading Theory of International Politics by Kenneth Waltz.
Or
maybe it was the debate with Scott Snyder. What was that book called?
Scott Sagan.
Sagan. Yeah.
The spread of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one because that's also kind of China's worst nightmare.
Yeah, a nuclear South Korea would probably or potentially lead to a nuclear Japan. Notwithstanding Japan is the only country that's been nuked. So there's sort of special considerations there. But it's not off the table anymore.
And from a technical standpoint, they're fully
Easy.
capable of doing it.
Yeah, easy. Their missiles would work. Their warheads would work. They could do it fast. South Korea is, shall we say, volatile
Yes.
at the moment. They've arrested the president for declaring martial law. That was not on my bingo card. Got to tell you, any of that.
People's bingo card.
Yeah, it's like, what the fuck is going on in South Korea right now? So it's like, yeah, it's kind of unpredictable.
By the way, like, if you're gonna, I mean, I'm glad it didn't get violent, obviously, but like, what a weak move. Like, if you're gonna declare martial law, I feel like you better know you've got the goods.
It was really weird. He's like, okay, I'm declaring martial law and suspending the legislature, and everybody was like, no, we don't like that. And then he was like, oh, okay, never mind. And just like wound it down. It's like, no, that's not how you do that. No, you double down and then you quadruple down and you keep going, because if you don't, you get fucking arrested. And that's what's happened.
Yeah.
So it's really weird.
It's like a coach of a sports team who's just like lost all respect from the team and tries to take a hard line, and everyone's basically like, fuck off, dude. No, like
we saw this recently with my Sacramento Kings and Mike Brown, who's a hard ass and a great coach, but he lost the locker room, right? Now Doug Christie's coaching and they're getting better results. So
I was going to say they have been playing a lot better. I know.
A lot better. Yeah.
People were surprised about that he got fired, but they rattled off like 6 in a row after that.
Yeah, it turns out even authoritarians need a base of support.
By the way, I mean, this will be nice for you to hear since you're. I like the Kings too. Super exciting team. As a Warriors fan, just
tough.
They fooled me again, man.
They had a great start to the season, and Buddy Hield was hitting 7 threes a game or whatever the fuck he was doing. We used to have him. He's a great shooter and an able replacement for captain. He got the captain hat. What? Clay Thompson. Jesus. Yeah, the old memory isn't what it used to be.
My thing was like last year they started terribly, and then they actually had a good end to the season.
Yeah.
All right, like I'm not shipped yet. They start off 12-3. I'm like, see, I told you. Now it's just like it's so bad.
They're kind of 500. The Kings beat them the other day. Yeah. Was it last? I guess it was last night. No, last night they lost to the Nuggets.
No, you're right. Last night they beat the Bulls. 2 nights ago they lost to the Kings.
Yeah, so they're kind of around 500 with the Kings, and it's like they're just another team now. Yeah, and look, any team that has Steph is a threat, except this one kind of isn't.
Well, there's a reason for that. If all 5 of the defenders only have to guard one guy,
and that's kind of what it is, right?
This is he absolutely should be a starter on the All-Star team. It's like, yeah, his are down, but he's being quintuple teamed all season and still putting up those numbers. It's actually really impressive.
Right, because nobody else is playing well or they're injured. The Warriors also have a bunch of injuries at the moment. So
anyway,
yeah,
yet another.
But we digress.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all areas going forward that we should focus on.
Oh yeah, like one thing I'm very confident of, Galen and our one viewer, is like we're gonna have stuff to talk about every week, like as this unfolds, and the world is not becoming more ordered or more orderly. It is the opposite, and that's what this show is about. You know, as far as I'm concerned.
Cool.
Should we leave it there?
I think so.
Awesome. All right. Till next time.
All right. Good to see you.
Later.
Later.